Transitions can be hard, but they also have the potential to be creative seasons in our lives. Welcome to Navigate, everyone. My name is Tim Austin, and this is the podcast designed to take some of the guesswork out of transition. Whether you have a transition looming in your future or you're trying to make sense out of a past or a current transition, this show is for you. In each episode, we introduce strategies and tools that individuals and teams can use to effectively navigate seasons of change. At Navigate, it's all about leveraging the challenges of change for optimal growth. This episode's conversation was recorded from Timberline Church in Fort Collins, Colorado, where I recently had the privilege of sitting down with Norm Edwards and Shahan and Tyra Teberian. Norm and his wife Heather have been global workers since 1996. They spent the first 10 years of service in Moscow giving direction to Moscow Theological Institute and giving general direction to various training efforts in the region. They also led a pioneering effort among unreached people groups in a 9-country region of the former Soviet Union. For another 10 years, Norm and Heather served as area directors over the countries of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia. In this role, they provided visionary direction, administrative oversight, and pastoral care to a group of 85 adults in these 7 countries. Most recently, Norm and Heather have stepped away from the role as area directors and taken on a new challenge to creatively construct an avenue into a completely closed nation. With 3 languages and over 2 decades of international experience and leadership, Norm brings a wealth of both knowledge and practice in equally challenging and successful environments. Shahan Teberian has been a lawyer for 26 years. He spent the first 18 years of his career in private practice as a commercial litigator in a large law firm in Philadelphia. Tyra worked in the financial industry for several years. In 2012, they and their 4 young children moved to the country of Armenia, where they engaged in nonprofit work. In 2016, they returned to the U.S., and Shahan currently serves as a university counsel and vice president of operations at the University of Valley Forge in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, where Tyra also serves as the director of development. They continue to work on specific projects in Armenia and with for-profit and non-profit enterprises all over the world. So, without further ado, let's dive into my conversation with Norm, Shahan, and Tyra. So guys, maybe we'll just start here. And as we think about navigating challenging transitions, what has been for you guys maybe one of the most challenging areas or seasons of transition to navigate?
Well, I think that for me, I grew up in England and at the age of 17 moved to the United States with my family. My family immigrated here, and I left behind everything that I'd ever known, all my friends, educational system, kinds of food, television programs, just everything. Left completely behind, coming to a country where I didn't know anybody, to a system I didn't know. All I knew about America was the TV show Chips and Kojak, and I thought all America was like that, and soon found out it wasn't. Moved to Philadelphia, and on top of that, went right into college. So I went from an English educational system right into an American educational system.
Wow!
And it was just very difficult at first. I remember as our plane landed in Boston, where we landed. I was weeping in tears because I didn't know. It was just the whole trauma suddenly hit me as the plane landed, and I spent the next week in bed not moving. That was very difficult.
Oh my goodness, yeah, does sound challenging. Yeah. So Tyra, what about you? You weren't in the picture yet, right? So you can't say marrying him was the most challenging thing. No. What can you say?
No, I would have to say, I've lived a life of a lot of transition. So when I was a kid, I remember my parents moved 7 times in 7 years.
Wow.
And I don't remember I think I have 2 friends from all my childhood, just because we moved around so much. And I was thankful for that as an adult, because it made transition a little bit more easy, but transition is never easy. So I think as an adult, the hardest transition had to be actually going overseas with children. That was the hardest thing, because it wasn't just me and worrying about how I felt. I was now navigating for other little people and actually my husband. So I think that was the hardest part for me, was not only just worrying about how I felt about it, but what was being vocalized from the people I was caring for. So that was I think the hardest.
Yeah. And how old were your kids when you guys went overseas for the first time?
I think Daniel was
11. Anna was
7.
No, Anna was 9.
9. Sorry.
Abigail was 7, and
Okay.
Madeline was 3.
3. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So they were little.
Yeah. But lots of questions to field.
Yeah.
Lots of concerns.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of concerns as parents. And
They were old enough to understand.
Right.
The older ones were old enough to understand the change, and it was radical to them, and so they were very vocal. I mean, at sometimes they were okay with it, and at some other times they were very not okay with it.
Yeah.
So I think the move overseas was the first time was the toughest.
Okay. Yeah. And I think a lot of people would say that, although the memories kind of fade, and thankfully the way God designs us, some of those really tough places fade, and we remember a lot of the great things and the relationships there and the things we experienced. Norm, we go way back. So we were, I think it was we went through candidate orientation together.
We did. We were both very young.
We were both very young. We both had our first kids, right? We had Adrienne, and you had
Ashley. Yeah.
Ashley, yeah. So we both had little daughters. I don't know about you, but I was thinking about taking my, at that point, maybe 10-month-old daughter to a country in civil war, and some of the concerns, like you're saying, Tyra, around that. So what about you, Norm, and how did you and Heather navigate some of what's been a really challenging transition for you?
Yeah, for me, I'm probably a little bit of a different breed. I love change and love risk. I don't have a problem with it. I was 17 years old when I left a French Canadian family, moved to the States, and loved it. Now, my experience, Shahan said Kojak and
Chips.
Chips.
Yeah.
Mine was Dukes of Hazzard.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I thought most Americans had tank tops, drinking beer on their porch,
Yeah.
and a rocking chair. So there was definitely there was a lot of adjustment, but it was an adrenaline rush to me. It really was. I enjoyed that. So the transitions, it's hard for me to even picture which one was hard, but the negative side of that is I'm transitioning with others who don't look at transition necessarily the same.
Right.
So I did have a young child when we transitioned who definitely, there was some shock to her system when we moved to Russia.
Right.
And my wife. It's a little strange because I was just thinking when Tyra mentioned that she's moved, when she was young, she moved quite a bit. My parents still live in the same house
Oh, wow.
that they moved into when I was 3 months old.
Wow.
Since Heather and I have been married, we were just thinking about this, just happened to be just the other day, we've moved every 2 years in the last 30 years.
But, it's so interesting. You would say that you love change, you enjoy change, you love risk, and yet you had this sounds like very kind of stay in one place childhood, right, for a long time.
Yeah.
But God knew what you were, He was preparing you for, right?
Agreed. It is kind of strange when I think about it.
Yeah.
I have a brother who moved 10 minutes away from my parents and still lives there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the only one who's done this, and I don't know why, but I still don't mind change. It's kind of fun. It's exciting.
Yeah.
I remember specifically two things that maybe it was hard, and at the same time, trying to capture some of the words that would describe it, but moving overseas from America.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember sitting on the plane, little girl in tow, my wife, all our luggage, which was a crazy amount of suitcases I don't even want to count. And I remember realizing I didn't have a key. I didn't have a house key.
Didn't have a key, a literal
key.
Okay.
No, we'd sold the cars. We had left home, and we had yet to buy anything or rent anything overseas. So I'm on the plane with no keys. And it was a moment of, wow, this is daunting. And then processing this and realizing this is really freeing. So there was that tension of, this is a little bit of insecurity, but a little bit of, wow, opportunities ahead.
Right, yeah. But of course, you were comforted, I'm sure, when you went to Russia and found out that they were the land of keys, right?
Yes.
Because Tajikistan was the same way.
Keys, and your keys, I think our house key was about
big,
6 inches
big
long.
Skeletal, I don't know, like skeleton keys or whatever.
It could be used as a weapon.
Yes.
Sure.
So you got your keys back.
I did. Yes, too many of them.
Yeah, no, that's a cool story. And I was kind of the same way. I grew up in a one house as long as I can remember, since I was like 2 years old till I was 18 years old, and same place, same house, and same town. Just very what some people would look at and say very stable childhood, and yet kind of like you, God was preparing me for something. None of my other siblings launched out like I did, and it was just something that I guess I thrive on too. And so I love change. I guess that's why we're doing this. Why I started this podcast, to talk about transition, because I love what God does in transition seasons too. And so maybe we'll kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about that. But because there's this kind of, we talk about change and we talk about transition. And in some senses, in some ways, the two words are synonymous or have a lot of overlap. But I really believe that we need to make a distinction when it comes to change and transition. Transition more being a process, where a process of personal development, personal growth, a season, a length of time, whereas change can come abruptly, right? Change can come instantly. Change can be a reaction to something or a choice. So there is, as I look at change and transition, I like to make that distinction. And sometimes I think the way I'm wired, and maybe the way you're wired, Norm, I don't know, but we can like change so much that we don't process the transition.
Exactly.
And but others maybe in our circle, in our family, our kids, our spouses, maybe they need time, more time. I think we all need time, but maybe they need more time to process. How are you guys, Shahan and Tyra, how are you guys wired maybe together as husband, wife, navigating transition, doing that together? What differences might you see there?
Well, I think that Tyra's point about the children really hit home with me, because that was the hardest part of our transition. And I'll tell probably a story that's my son's story, because watching him do the transition really affected me, and I think Tyra too. So when we first got to Armenia, Daniel, our son, was 11, and for the change
right,
was very traumatic for him. He didn't transition immediately, obviously. It was a big change for an 11-year-old boy who had only known America, and he was full of conflicting emotions. So he would, at one moment, have a lot of anger and would yell at me, "Dad, you ruined my life. I can't believe you brought me here. You took me away from everything I know." But at the same time, he's 11. He loves me. I'm his father, and so he's trying to resolve these tensions with his legitimate anger. I think he was legitimately angry. And then, so 5 minutes later, he's like, "But Dad, can I have a hug? I love you." And he's not able to resolve the tension in his 11-year-old mind. And over the course of time, he developed mechanisms to help him transition. And so it took him a while, but the anger disappeared, but there were other things. And so when we knew that we were not going to be going back to Armenia a couple of years ago, Tyra and I went to our home there to collect some things. And I went into Daniel's room and looked around, and I started crying because having realized what he'd been through, I told Tyra, he created a haven for himself in this room. His little knickknacks and stuff that he'd put in different places that, and I said, I can't do this, Tyra. I got to leave the room. You got to come here and take care of it. Because watching how my son had navigated that huge change into a transition that worked for him, and yet still wasn't right for him. And it was very tough. Yeah. So he managed to find a way where he could live, but his method of living was to create a cocoon. His little things. Right. It was like a prison cell that he had fitted out for himself.
Right.
To kind of what you had asked about as a couple, I think that in personality, Shahan tends to be a little bit more, I'm going to say negative, but like more realistic, like more realistic.
Yeah. You're disadvantaged. We don't have Norma and I don't have our wives here today.
But in nature, I'm more positive.
Okay.
So that's I think it helps balance our family out a little bit. That even when we're in private, we're talking about something, a transition that was coming up for our family. You know, he will say to me, "How come you don't see it this way?" And I say to him, I see it that way, but because of the health of our family, I need to be positive about the transition so that it doesn't come across. I mean, I'm very, now that I'm a little older, I realize transition is tough. Transition is never perfect. Yeah. And there's a lot that goes into it emotionally. But I would say I try to be positive just because I feel like if there's positivity around something that is difficult, it just helps it. So that's how we kind of navigate it as a couple. So.
Yeah.
And then I drag her back to reality.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have the positive approach and perspective when it comes to difficult transition. That's for sure. Yeah. Maybe kind of when that brings to mind this whole process of transitions being really fertile ground for growth and development. Maybe, Norm, I'll ask you, so transitions, we can look at transitions kind of very, scientifically, I guess you could say, and say, well, they have an ending and they have a beginning, but in between there's this middle neutral zone, right? Where, and whether everything seems to be unclear, there's a lot of questions, a lot of lack of clarity, and that can be prolonged at times in the line of work that we've been in as global workers. But I'm always amazed at listening to transition stories from other people and how this middle zone or this neutral zone can be a creative place, really creative. So maybe you could speak to that, Norm. Well, how has that potentially been, creative for you, a creative place?
Yeah. First of all, I wish Heather was here because she does so much better at transition than I do. I just, like I said, I just kind of go for it. And I'm excited. And to my detriment, don't take time to walk through the process as you talked about. And that's what Heather has done so well for us. Every time there's a transition coming, I don't know where she got these, but there's a set of questions. I don't even know where she keeps these questions, but they come up. There's a piece of paper that comes out every time. But they're a great set of questions that I don't remember what they are specifically, but we sit around as a family, and we just usually go through one question a night for 7, 8 nights, and just talk through. What are the challenging things that we've faced in the last number of years? What are things we're looking forward to? What are the things we're going to miss? And we walk through this, and it creates that story around this is what our life is, and this is where it's going, we think, and this is how we feel in the middle. This is a process. That's been super helpful for our girls, for Heather, for me as well. Yeah. I think transitions I almost look at them as an opportunity to reboot. Take inventory, reboot. Take inventory, and then reboot. So we don't do that often if we're not transitioning.
Right.
We just kind of keep moving, and we stay on the wheel and keep the wheel spinning. And it's a chance to step off the wheel and to ask these key questions. Yeah. How do we get here? So I facilitate life plans. With this process, it's a 2-day process. I sit in a room with one individuals for 8 hours a day. And it's a phenomenal process. I do that because I went through one. Heather and I both went through one. And it was just like that. It was like stepping off the wheel. It was during a time of transition, stepping off the wheel. How do we get here? Where are we going? And how are we going to get there? Those are just great, simple questions to ask. And they help us process. The challenging thing, I think, for a family is Heather and I, for the most part, chose the transitions. And our children just came along. Yeah. And that's where we have to be very, very careful and intentional, I think. Right. Our children are not disadvantaged by transition. Yeah. But they can be marked by it. And I think it's an opportunity for us to parent well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what you're saying there about rebooting and kind of weaving it into a story, that can be so encouraging for us, because where we see that God is actually, He's not finished yet. And Shahan has a scripture reference for us. Don't worry, I can edit that.
How do you tell that?
And now for the narration.
How do you do
What are you doing, my son?
I had a great thing to show you, and then I turned everything off. It's on Do Not Disturb. It's on Vibrate.
This is great. Unscripted. I love it.
Forget it.
Of course, I lost my train of thought. Story. Yes. So I think it can be really encouraging for us to see how God is weaving together a story. And our kids, now that they're older, maybe not when it was hard in the moment and they were younger and transitioning. And but now that they're older, they're beginning to see that story unfold, and also all the times they rebooted with us, and were put into those situations of transition. All those times were purposeful, and they had meaning, they had purpose. It's just that you don't always see it at the time, at the moment.
It was part of the journey.
Yes. Yeah, it's
that
part of the journey.
made them and us who we are.
Right.
Sometimes we handled it well, sometimes not.
Right.
It still shapes who we are.
Okay. So sometimes we handled it well. Sometimes we didn't.
Can I share a quick story?
Go ahead.
So when I was in between my 8th grade and my 9th grade year, my parents decided to move from the Fairfax, Virginia area to the Portland, Oregon area. And so that time in my life, that was, nobody asked me, like Norm said. And my parents made the decision. We moved cross country. And I remember for 5 days straight crying. And that was a very poor transition in my life. And not only that, I let it drag into my freshman year of high school. I refused to make friends. I kind of put up the wall. I was not happy. Now I know that God brought me to that place so that, there's a lot that I learned in leadership. I went from no youth group to a very large youth group, a couple hundred kids, lots of opportunities, a lot of chances to learn and grow as a leader. I really believe that God had me at a place because he knew what was up ahead, you know, but I did not like that transition at all. And I guess it takes time, you know, and it wasn't that long after, you know, high school began to, you know, go through the years that I was like, okay, Lord, I get it.
Yeah.
You know, but it took me some time. Maturity had to kind of set in a little bit. But what Norma's saying about how, you know, as parents, we make decisions and kids just don't necessarily get a say. You know, I'm very sorry for that, but there's a reason. But, you know, God supremely has our best interests at heart.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, I was sharing this with somebody yesterday. It was a revelation to me. It may not be to others, but in the book of Ecclesiastes, there's a whole passage in the beginning where God, where the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes is talking about seasons, and he gives a season, and then he gives its opposite corollary. So he'll say there's a time for laughing, rejoicing, and there's a time for weeping. There's a time to live, and there's a time to die, and there's a whole list. And then at the end of that whole list of opposites, of seasons, there's a verse that says, and God will bring out the beauty of each in its time. And the revelation to me was that wasn't just talking about the good parts of the twin emotions. It was talking about both the time of rejoicing and the time of mourning. It was talking about the time of living and the time of dying. So each of these seasons of transition, even the challenging ones and difficult ones, have a beauty about them that God will reveal.
Good.
And he'll bring out
Yeah.
of that. And that to me was like amazing that that didn't apply just to the positive things. It applied to the negative things as well. Or what we would call the negative things.
Great analogy. Yeah. Because there is grief, there is loss, which accompanies transition, and each one of us experiences that differently. But to see that side of whether they're, you know, the negative kind of emotions that come with the transition piece or the positive, it's all a package deal, you know, but it's all part of God's design to bring something really beautiful. So I hope this conversation encourages families out there, maybe families with TCKs that are feeling like stuck. Maybe there's some things they can do to help process that transition with their kids, like your wife, Heather, did with you guys as a family. Pulled out the piece of paper, had the questions, processing together, sharing life that way. Yeah. What about the process of letting go for you guys? In order to embrace something new, we got to let go of something. That's just kind of the nature of transition, right? So what have you guys, maybe in a recent transition, something that you can recall, because I know we've had lots of transitions, but something maybe fresh or current. What are some things or something that you've had to let go of in order to embrace something new?
I can speak to our current role as missionaries in residence, and we don't live in the country of Armenia right now, and I think that was, for whatever reason, when we came and then we, got put at the university, not being with the people that we truly love is difficult, and even though there's a lot of things in that mix. We really love the people we served, and I think that was a painful part. I know it was even now, I enjoy going back to visit, and it's really nice. And when I leave, I know that a piece of me is always there, So I think that's tough. That's right now, I think when anytime we serve a people, and we fall in love with them and we live life with them, when you transition to something different, you leave a little bit of your heart there, and I think that's hard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would agree. Relationships. When we transitioned to move overseas, we lost a lot of relationships. As soon as people heard we were going to live overseas, they kind of cut us off, not in a malicious way, but they kind of carved us out of their lives. And so we stopped, even though we were transitioning over the course of a year, we stopped getting invited to birthday parties, stopped getting invited to different events because people just had written us out of their lives.
Yeah.
And that was difficult. At first, it was difficult not to take it personally. Then we realized it really wasn't a personal malicious decision. It was just they compartmentalized and had to move on from us.
Yeah.
And then the other way, when we figured out that we were not going to go back to Armenia, leaving behind those relationships, which was the hardest part. I just, within the latest couple of days, let somebody who's very dear to us, the leader of one of the churches in Armenia, know that we weren't going back. And he was somebody that had turned into a spiritual father for me, a mentor, and somebody whom I would consider like a father in Armenia that when my father was thousands of miles away. And to let him know that I wasn't going back really tore a part out of my heart. Because it's leaving behind somebody that has grown to be very dear to me.
Yeah.
And it's those kind of relationships that really are the worst, or the hardest things to leave behind.
Yeah. Norm, something hard letting go.
Yeah, I would agree with the relationships piece. I think one of the sayings that we've begun to just repeat is places are just places, things are just things, but people and relationships are really what make life. And so it is a challenge. Community, we're built for community. Yeah. And community doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
And so when we transition and lose one community to become a part of a new community is rather difficult.
Right.
And I think that's really anywhere in the world, becoming a part of community. Some cultures are more embracing than others, but it does take time to build trust. And as we say, trust is lost in buckets and gained in drops. We've found, and this is maybe for families who have transitioned to America from overseas, we've found that for the most part in America, and this isn't trying to be harsh at all, I think it's just part of reality, people have their quota of friends and they're not necessarily looking for more. Yeah. And here we come dropped in their community, and it takes time. Yeah. And we found you have to be intentional. You have to be repetitive. You keep showing up at the places. If you land in one place and you decide we want to find a church, and you start shopping for church after church after church, it's very hard, obviously. Right. Just land somewhere and dig in, put some roots down, and then I don't, and my mind's going there, so I don't know if this is part of, I can't even remember the original question, so here I go. Family, our close immediate family,
right,
is the heart of what makes the transition successful and bearable, if that makes sense. So I said we moved 30 times or 15 times in 30 years for Heather and I. My girls gave a plaque to Heather just a couple of years ago that really was super meaningful, and it made us feel like we may have transitioned right a few times at least.
Yeah.
And it was, home is where my mom is.
Oh, that's great.
And really, I mean, if you think about that, and it's really true.
Home is where my mom is. Love that.
I don't know why Dad got left out of that,
Right,
but I'm happy that my girls, they didn't make the plaque. I'm sure they would have added that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But you're always with Mom.
Yes.
You're always together. So it goes
correct.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so true, and I can agree with you totally on that, Norm, about transitioning together as a family makes it all worthwhile. And if you're not always going to be right in the middle of transition, all on the same page, and there's going to be so much range of emotion and excitement, pushback, and everything in between, but in the end, I love that perspective your daughters have, and I think we can partner with God in creating the best possible environment for that to take place. What a reward, you know.
It, to us, somebody expressed it like this a while back to us. It's kind of like that plaque represents this, that family is the buoy that you hook onto. Yeah. And you can drift far away, but the hook is still there. And I know that that may not be true for some of the listeners in the sense that some have strayed. But the invitation to hook their line on the buoy, regardless of where they've gone.
Yeah.
For the kids to know that. Yeah. Even if they've chosen not to for the moment, to know that changes everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. And wow. And I just, you know, we've all talked about relationships in terms of what we've had to let go of. And one of the hardest things definitely is relationships. But for some of the sentimental people or nostalgic people, maybe nostalgic or something, I'm a little nostalgic. So I really grieve places too, like places I've been, like the mountains of Tajikistan, you know, and being able to go camp there and very, you know, but it does bring back memories of camping with my kids. So it goes back to relationships as well. But don't feel bad, I guess, when you're in the middle of, or when you're on the other side of transition and you're missing a place or, you know, a physical location or something, you know, because that's we grow attached to those things as well. But yeah, certainly relationships are there and they kind of come to the surface all the time, because that's what we're called to do, and that's yeah.
You know, it's interesting. The University of Valley Forge, one of the classes I teach to students is about Armenia, and I play them a lot of videos of Armenia and just to show them in pictures what's going on there. And I sometimes have to stop myself crying in the class because I remember the market, or I remember I can smell the things that we're seeing, and I can hear and it's that hustle and bustle. It's exactly what you're saying. It's not just the relationships, but it's also that everyday street life,
right? And
it's something that it's a bittersweet thing to move on. But we believe that God has called us to do different things, and so we understand God sometimes asks you to do things that are difficult. And no matter when or where, every time you leave somewhere, you're going to leave a part of yourself behind.
Right.
And you're just never going to be able to avoid that.
So true.
But you have to live, and you can't live a rich life unless you're willing to, at times, to give some things up.
So true. Yeah. Well, let me just to shift gears, and as we kind of wrap up this conversation today, how being here, this has been a real fun time for me these last few days, being at Timberline Church here in Fort Collins, Colorado, during a missions focus emphasis a few days, and it's been great to rub shoulders with all you guys and others that Timberline Church partners with, and but we've talked a lot. A lot of our conversations have gone into kind of soul care. How do I care for my soul? Self-care, you know, we can call it self-care, soul care. But how do you care for your soul through transition seasons? Because I think for me, sometimes it feels like, you know, you're shooting at a moving target. You know, when you're in transition and you're trying to hold on to some anchor points. And for us, that a lot of that has to do with how we care for ourselves emotionally and spiritually. What are some things that have helped you guys all through the tumultuous, turbulent times of transition?
For me, it's prayer and praise. So praying that God would just, you know, make the path straight and clear as much as He'll let me see, and that and I continue to just praise Him in the season I'm in. I mean, and then also, you know, I'm blessed to have some really great girlfriends that I can, you know, draw on as well. I don't think that we should ever do anything alone. That I'm really thankful for, my family, that, whether it be my husband or my mom or my dad. But I'm also very thankful for my good friends, that I could just say, can you pray with me? Can you, but I really draw my strength from just my time in prayer, and then just in my time in worship and praise. So that's great. Kind of where I stay grounded.
Mm-hmm. I think certainly prayer is the key. But beyond that, there are other things that I think help you remain healthy in those times of transition. And from a more practical standpoint, it's really embracing the transition and not trying to resist. In other words, if we feel that God has called us to go somewhere, I don't want to create an American cocoon within my home. Certainly there are traditions that we as Americans want to carry with our family. We would celebrate Thanksgiving, and we certainly would do things like that. But on the other hand, we wanted to immerse ourselves entirely in Armenian culture as well. Mm-hmm. And so we would go out to places. We would do things. We would partake of life as Armenians did, and we would go visit Armenians in their homes, and we would try to embrace that so that we were healthy. Because I think that if we had tried to resist and say, no, it would have been a lot more difficult for us. And I think that did work for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. And again, it's going back to the relationships. And yeah. You don't have to let go of those in the sense of you're leaving a place geographically. They're going to look different, but there's some connection will always be there, and to embrace that. Yeah. Norm?
Yeah, I would agree with both of those things as well. And then I'm going to maybe be a little vulnerable because it's an area I haven't done well with. But I think one of the areas that's really important is to identify as quickly as possible what drains and what fills me, so that I can be a whole person. Because I think sometimes we'll focus, and I think there are seasons where we need to focus on spiritual depth, and we need to hone in on that. There are other times where there's maybe emotional work we need to do and make sure. But that whole idea that physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual, what drains me, what fills me. And I love the idea that when you feel most exhilarated, what are you doing, who are you with, and where are you? If you can identify that, you can identify what fills you.
Yeah.
The drains, most of them, we pretty much know. Like we know when we're getting drained. But we're always draining. And so we have to always be filling. And what's been difficult in transitions that I haven't done very well is one of my fills for me is just getting out on the golf course. Well, I couldn't do that in Russia or Ukraine. Right? It just wasn't available. So it's making sure I identify what does fill. What can replace that? What hobby or what personal piece that, and I did not do well at that. I wish I had taken the time to really process that. And if you can find things that obviously you can do as a couple or as a family that fills you, then that all better. Right. But I think there's also individuals. Every one of us in the family, both of my kids and my wife and I, have individual things that are different than each other that fill us. And we need to be cognizant of that and seek them out in every transition as quickly as possible. Yeah. So there's not that lull, because when we drain before we fill, or when we drain more than we fill, this is where we get a little depressed, where we get, we're not at our best.
Right.
And we need, especially as parents, to be at our best for our kids in those transition times.
Yeah.
And so those are, I think they're key.
Yeah. It's good.
And again, I didn't do them well, so I'm telling on myself.
Well, I think we've all had seasons where we wish we could go back and maybe, be more prayerful, be more relational, as you're talking about, having those conversations, which, again, ground us and help us through those difficult seasons, and also be more self-aware, just as we have those conversations, as we sit in God's presence. What are those things that are filling me? What are those things that are draining me? And like you said, Norm, it can look very different. Like if we have a hobby somewhere, if we're in our home country that we can't take with us, or we have to find a replacement. We have to find something that fills us. It's good. Yeah. Well, this has been a really great conversation with you guys. I really appreciate you joining me in a very busy few days here at Timberline Church. And where are you guys all off to next?
We're going to go back to working at the University of Valley Forge. We're going to go back and see our kids who we might miss, and getting on with our university duties.
Yep.
Super.
Back to D.C. for me.
Back to D.C. for Norm.
Where things are calm and
yes,
just settled in every way.
Oh, I'm sure.
Cherry blossom season. So
well, that's nice.
We're good.
Good. Yeah. And I'm on my way back to California in a couple days, be reunited with my family. So looking forward to that. And so thanks again, guys, for joining me.
Thank you for inviting us.
There are so many great takeaways from our conversation today, but I'll leave you with something Norm said that's key for rebooting during transition seasons. What drains you and what energizes you? When you feel most exhilarated, what are you doing? Who are you with? And where are you? Let me encourage you to slow down and prayerfully ask yourself those questions. As a coach, I'm passionate about helping global workers slow down, capture insights, gain perspective, and grow through transition seasons. Book a discovery call with me at EncompassLifeCoaching.com if you're interested to learn how working with a coach can help you get intentional during this time of transition. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of Navigate Podcast. I've been your host, Tim Austin, and if this has been helpful to you, would you mind rating the podcast, writing a review, or sharing on social media? And of course, you can always subscribe so that you're sure to get in on the next episode, and I'll see you there.